Recently, I counted every single student I taught. So I taught almost 3,000 MBA students, and I taught more than 5,000 executive students, including you. Here's an interesting rule, okay, that I've discovered in my research about how VCs make decisions. Whenever you think about a very uncertain new situation, experts should speak last. Reid Hoffman, who's a partner at Greylock, about 15 years ago, maybe more, came to his partners at Greylock and said, you know, I have this amazing startup. You can allow strangers to sleep on the sofa in your living room. And everybody said, this is really stupid. Reid Hoffman proceeded to be an investor in what became Airbnb. That is conviction, not consensus. I did not write a book for venture investors, even though many venture investors are eagerly reading this, okay? But I really rewrote the book for those who make decisions on behalf of many people. I have to say the life of a corporate VC is tough because they have the mandate to invest in new stuff, new, exciting, shiny stuff. They're very often using the decision-making rules that are established or designed by the large corporation.
Hello, Professor Ilya Strebulaev. I'm so glad to be back to your office and then talk about the new book you have, The Venture Mindset.
Thank you for having me here.
So The Venture Mindset is a playbook you wrote for delivering extraordinary results from you and then your partner, Alex Dan. This book is about how to make smarter bets and achieve extraordinary results behind the life-changing companies like Amazon, Google, SpaceX, Zoom. Are venture capital investors. VCs are known for their extraordinary ability to spot emerging trends, identify disruptive startups, attract talent, and then bring new industries into being. Now, my first question is, why is the name The Venture Mindset? You posted on LinkedIn that you spend lots of hours, right? Tried so many different varieties. Why settling on this name?
Indeed, we tried hundreds of different titles, and we always came back to the venture mindset. Not only Alex and I, not only our publisher, but also, in fact, everybody whom we asked. We also ran professional A/B tests.
Okay, it's data-driven.
Okay, data-driven, and they all came back with the venture mindset, and I'm glad that we did so. Because when I think about the venture mindset, it's like the new mental model about how you make decisions in the world of uncertainty, in the world of disruption. And today, whether you're a founder of a startup, whether you're an investor, or whether you work in a large corporation, you are surrounded by this uncertainty. You're surrounded by a fast-changing world, and you need a different mindset. You need a mindset different from the traditional mindset that helped us to get here, okay? But now we need a different one. And I think that is the venture mindset. And that's what we wrote a book about.
Okay, and you have so many years of research and then teaching in this space. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your co-author.
Of course. So I've been at Stanford for 20 years. So I came and as a professor of finance to Stanford, the Graduate School of Business, in 2004. Okay, and professor of finance. So I was teaching finance. What do you expect?
That's 20 years.
Okay, that's 20 years. But 20 years ago, I was teaching what we call corporate finance, about how people should make corporate financial decisions. Now, many of my students, many of my MBA students, went and became founders of startups or became venture investors, investing in startups. What I realized early on is that they were making decisions differently from how we taught our MBA students to make decisions. Like if a student went and became a chief finance officer in a large company, okay, he actually would be following what I told him, how to make decisions in our finance class. But if she became a founder or a venture capitalist, she would not. And I was intrigued, okay? And when there was a chance to start teaching a venture capital class at Stanford, I decided that's cool, I'd love to do it.
So basically, going back to the name of the book, Venture Mindset, the venture mindset is very, very different from a corporate venture, a corporate mindset. You have been teaching for 20 years, so it's two different mindsets.
So I have not been teaching corporate mindset for 20 years. I started teaching, I would say corporate mindset, I would say corporate finance.
Corporate finance.
It's not a mindset, it's corporate finance, okay? Rules, theory, practice, etc. But then after I started teaching venture capital, more than 10 years ago now, I kind of really got excited about this. And
it's a different mindset.
It's a very different mindset, a very different way to make decisions. And so now most of my research, actually really all of my research, is about how venture capitalists make decisions, how founders make decisions, how private equity investors make decisions, and the economic consequence of those decisions, okay? And yes, I realized now, doing this for more than 10 years, I realized that it's a very, very different mindset. Now, again, when I say mindset, it can be decomposed into a lot of specific principles. And this is what the book is about, which is the book is about 9 specific principles of the venture mindset. Now, so I've been teaching for 20 years, and I'm very lucky because I taught many fantastic students. In fact, recently I counted every single student I taught. So I taught almost 3,000 MBA students and MSX students at Stanford. And I taught more than 5,000 executive students, including you. And one of my students, his name is Alex Dunk. He's among one of those many, many students with whom I keep in touch. And I invest in their startups after they graduate, or help them raise money, or become an investor in their funds, or just provide advice, or just remain friends. And he, after taking my class, went off and became a venture builder, applying those venture mindset principles in Amazon, which is a very venture-minded organization. And then he became a partner at McKinsey, again, applying those venture mindset principles. So and then he became the CEO of a healthcare startup. Okay?
So he's not only one of your good students, learned a lot of the interesting gist out of it, but also applied that in his day-to-day job.
Exactly. So he has been applying this for years. And then during COVID, we met. And how we met and saw each other, we formed a bubble, is because I'm also interested in wine. In fine wine, okay?
Who doesn't like?
Well, you might remember this from our class together. But, and so I decided to use this COVID time to classify my wine collection.
Got it.
And I asked Alex to help. So we went down and spent hours in my wine cellar in very cold. My wine cellar is at 53, 54. So we were wearing a hat, a scarf, boots, and so on. And we spent hours there, and we were talking about the venture mindset and how this really could be useful in a lot of situations, in large companies, in small companies, in new companies, in old companies, in profitable companies, in distressed companies, also in non-profits, in governments, but also in our personal life, by students, by retirees. And so we decided to write a book to really make an impact on how people make decisions every single day, individually and in groups.
So basically, you are kind of you have compressed your years of teaching, and then also in Alex years of being a practitioner, right? And then combine that into one interesting book. That's what's happening here.
I hope so. That's what I say all the time. This is 20 years at Stanford, compressed in one small book.
And then now you get a chance to actually, one book, you get a good preview of it. So before we get to the details, some of the details of the book, I really wanted to get your take. You mentioned that I was lucky enough to be in your class. There were a few things actually, ever since you taught about this in the class, in my day-to-day as a corporate executive, as a startup entrepreneur, I've been thinking about these, there were 3 things I thought of quite a bit. And I thought, these 3 things, how is that relevant, in the venture mindset? The first one is, you taught a lot about the wisdom of the crowd, right? The wisdom of the crowd is basically the power of collective knowledge and opinions of a diverse group of people. So in many ways, it's more powerful than experts. Now, in this case, the book is talking about the venture mindset, about VC. Whenever we think about VC, we're thinking about very capable guy who's able to pick, the early stage companies. How can I reconcile these two things, right? On the one hand, you are probably talking about, the mindset of VC so that they are winning, they are picking companies like Amazon, Google. But on the other hand, you are being preaching about the wisdom of the crowd. So how can I reconcile these two things?
It's a good point. First of all, so wisdom of the crowd, I think, is a very, very useful concept. In the traditional mindset, okay, it's a very useful concept, which means that, and you said we should not necessarily trust experts. That if you ask maybe millions of people, okay, how they feel, let's say, it's likely will produce a better results about next year's economy than what experts say, okay? Now, in the world of VC, there's one implication of the wisdom of crowds, at least one, maybe more, and there's one contradiction.
Okay.
Again, contradictions is important is because the venture mindset is different from the traditional mindset. Okay, but let's start with implication. One implication in the from the wisdom of crowd is you should not trust one person, especially yourself. You should trust more people. Okay, so in the world of venture, and this is one of the principles that we discussed in the book, venture capitalists very often ask opinion of others. So they have partners in their venture capital firms. They ask opinion of their partners. Sometimes there are situations where you're allowed to invest again in the same startup only if you find somebody else, another venture investor in another firm that is reputable enough, credible enough, and is going to put money into the same startup. Okay.
Interesting.
In fact, that person is going to be driving the valuations, and they do it to avoid biases. But I think that is also partially the wisdom. It depends on how you understand the word of crowd. Now, contradictions. A very good friend of mine, who is a well-known venture capitalist, his name is Alex Rampel. He's a partner at a venture capital firm, Andreessen Horowitz.
Yep.
I think better known as A16Z these days. Okay?
Yeah.
So, and he says, I love his quotes. One of his quotes is, "Conviction beats consensus." Now, if we understand wisdom of crowd as consensus, then I think the venture mindset will typically disagree. Because in the venture mindset, you're facing a lot of uncertainty. You're trying to catch a home run, an outlier. And if everybody agrees, okay, what the outlier is, then very likely it is not an outlier. An outlier, by definition, is somebody that not everybody sees at this point, right? And not only you have to be convinced at this point, conviction, but also it has to be different from everybody else's conviction. So if you look at the best returns venture investors generated, those are all produced by deals, by investments that at the time they made those investments, generically people did not think it was a great idea. Let me give you an example. So Reid Hoffman,
Yep.
who's a partner at Greylock, okay, about 15 years ago, maybe more, came to his partners at Greylock and said, I have this amazing startup. I found this amazing startup, okay? I think we should invest in the startup. And here's the idea of the startup. You can allow strangers to sleep on the sofa in your living room overnight, okay? And everybody, I believe, at Greylock said, "This is really stupid. Like
Strangers.
strange. Like I don't.
In America.
We don't see strangers sleep in our house." They said, okay. Now, in fact, I believe one of the partners said that, you know what, everybody has the right to make a mistake. Everybody has the right to fail. So let this be your failure. And of course, Reid Hoffman proceeded to be an investor in what became Airbnb. That is conviction, not consensus. Make sense?
Yeah, this is one of the things I've been thinking a lot because in the last decade I've been on the investment side, investor side, entrepreneur side, and then also corporate side. Wearing different hats over the last decade. I think one way for me to think about this is, there's a founder or VC, right? They have to make a decision. Do we want to go for this direction or not? Do we want to invest? And then the next level are the experts, right? The experts in this field. And then there is also general public, right? I would suspect, right, there are a lot of experts at the time who would say, hey, this is a stupid idea because people do not like it However, if you ask a general public, it may or may not be true, right? Because, depends on how much money I'm making, depends on how much money in my checking account, depends on the situation. Possibly, potentially, the wisdom of the crowd is different from the experts, the opinion. That being said, I totally agree with you. I was a year at Greylock. I heard that same story. And then honestly, I think this is the one example that you shouldn't trust the expert, to say the least, right?
Yeah, it's interesting that, I think the best VCs trust neither crowd nor experts. Again, because an outlier is something that is out there. Here's an interesting rule, okay, that I've discovered in my research about how VCs make decisions. This is one of the implications of the venture mindset, which I think is really interesting. So whenever you think about a very uncertain new situation, experts should speak last. It's very unusual. Think about this. So we're, let's say, discussing, let's say there are 10 of us, okay, including you and I. And let's say we're discussing new trends in venture capital and that we should invest in them. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm an expert in venture capital. And so it's very natural to say, Ilya, let's hear what Ilya thinks about this, okay? And I think if we don't expect a lot of changes, that is the right approach. But if we're on the cusp of something really new, of course, sometimes we don't know that we're on the cusp of something new, experts, in fact, could be in their golden cage, who rely on past experience, not on the new experience. And so at this point, in fact, hearing from the experts might be detrimental. So again, the venture mindset is different.
Very interesting. So the second thing, I also have been thinking a lot, since, you taught this in the class about a decade ago, is this regression to the mean. Regression to the mean means that the idea that rare or extreme events are likely to be followed by more typical ones. Over the time, outcome regress to the average or mean, right? So the reason I wanted to discuss here is, there were extraordinary VCs who invested in Airbnb, Amazon, Google. Do you think that they should subject to regression to the mean so that next 10 investments they are making would be average, based on that thesis?
So first of all, let me give you a real example so that everybody understands what regression to the mean is. Because the idea behind the regression to the mean is that you have your ability and then you have noise or random luck, okay? So here's the classical example of regression to the mean, is that let's say you buy a lottery ticket and you win a jackpot. You're now a millionaire, okay? Now, if you buy another lottery ticket next week, we expect you not to win. Okay, you buy a ticket, that is the regression to the mean. Okay. Now, what is really interesting is that when you look at many investors, including some VCs, you observe regression to the mean. They might have one interesting deal, which is jackpot, and then they have no jackpots in the future. That's that. So that is regression to the mean. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the smart VCs who follow the venture mindset and you look at them over time, what you observe is what we call in academia persistence, which means that effectively they bought a lottery ticket, they got a jackpot, and then they bought another lottery ticket, and then again they won a jackpot. And that's not luck, that is skill.
How come?
That's skill. So if you win jackpot repeatedly, lottery after lottery after lottery, that's called skill, that's not luck. So regression to the mean, of course, exists also in the venture world. It's actually a very, very important engineering property. But the degree of the regression to the mean depends on the ratio of the skill and the noise. Noise is always there. Now, the venture world, there's so many failures. You expect a lot of randomness, okay? But also, if you invest not in one startup, but in many, 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 let's say you buy 50 lottery tickets every week, what is the probability you're going to win a jackpot at least once? So I think, again, the venture mindset is that when we observe many VCs who follow this venture mindset, they tend to have persistence, which means that they, even though they experience a lot of failures as well, okay, time after time, or vintage after vintage of their funds, they find very successful companies. So that Airbnb is not just a random outcome. Okay, in Reid Hoffman's career in Greylock, we can go and check other investments that he made, and he made a number of other very substantial
So it's
investments.
not a, by definition, it's not just only a lottery ticket, right? There's some luck, but then there is a lot of skill.
There's always luck.
Yep.
By definition, there's always luck. But the ratio of degree to luck is different.
So I think, from that perspective, regression to the mean is more applicable when that thing is based on luck, less on the skill, right? But for venture mindset, there is at least some skill, some framework.
So regression to the mean, I think, is always kind of applicable, but its importance depends on how much ability or skill you have and how much luck. So if you have, if you buy a lottery ticket, unless you cheat, there is no ability, okay? So it's only luck. And therefore we'll observe a perfect regression to the mean. There are also situations in life when you have very little. When you will have very little, let's say I'm going to give you an elementary math problems right now. 2 plus 2 is 4, 7 plus 7 is 14, and so on. So you have skill, and there will be almost no luck, okay? Maybe in 1,000 problems you'll make one mistake, okay, randomly. So that is, but the real life is where you have both skill and luck. And I think the difference between situations where you follow the venture mindset principles, by the way, not only I think by VCs, by everybody when they face uncertain situation, then I think what's happening is just you increase the ratio of the skill to luck.
Cool. And then last but not least, there is one thing you also mentioned about, 10 years ago, I remember for a long time, is this bias, human bias, this better than average effect bias. It is really about the tendency for people to perceive their abilities, attributes, or personalities, traits are superior compared with their average peer. Now, in the case of the venture investment, I think it's fair to say at least a lot of people perceive VC to be, having superior capability because they are accomplished, they are able to do some interesting things. And also many VC also perceive themselves to be superior in terms of the certain capabilities. Do you see that a VC, like in Silicon Valley, has this, better than average bias in themselves?
Yeah, it's a good question. First of all, I'm very happy to report that many of my students, 10 years down the road, remember 3 principles, and I'm sure you remember more from the class. So that is, I think, my end goal really as a professor.
It's my honor to be your student.
Right. So better than average. First of all, it's interesting because the venture mindset has learned how to deal with the better than average forever. It's very important because while I think better than average bias exists around us in all situations, in the venture world, traditionally it's been always more important. Why? So, as I already mentioned, I've been teaching a lot of students, and many of my students would like to become founders. And so they come to my office and we'll talk about their aspirations. And every single founder, every single student who is a founder of a fledgling startup will tell me, oh, Professor Ilya, here's a startup, and let me tell you how I'm going to change the world. Now,
everyone does
are
that.
they all going to change the world? Maybe not. Some of them will, okay? So I think founder of startups tend to be optimistic. And as a result of that, venture capitalists know this. So first of all, they need to debias whatever founders tell them. Okay, that is a skill. It's a skill to cut through the optimistic projections of the founders and try to understand what is the real value of this startup, whether it makes sense to invest in them. Okay, but there's a second angle to this, which is you asked me about. So what VCs think about themselves, or really, what the venture mindset.
And more importantly, does that perception compromise their ability to make investments?
Yeah. First of all, if you really believe that you're great, it's okay, but maybe you're great. But if you believe that you're greater than you are, okay, sometimes it helps you. So again, optimistic founders, are prepared in the uncertain world to take actions that founders who are realists will never take. The truth is that, I think, and I'm going to speak as a finance professor, okay? In finance, we teach students NPV, net present value, which in fact is the benefit cost analysis. So here's the truth, I think, is that the NPV of many, maybe most startups is negative, which is many realistic founders will look around, will calculate the value, and will say, I'm actually not going to proceed with this. So I think a lot of new things happen because of optimistic founders. Okay? Now VCs, some of them are also optimistic, both about the future and about their abilities. But what I observed is different, I think, is that I mentioned earlier conviction. So I think what's happening is that the venture capitalists that follow the venture mindset, then first, they will get conviction about a specific space or specific something, okay? Not a specific, not a startup, but some kind of an idea, a thesis. And then they will spend a lot of time preparing to invest in this thesis. And then, yes, some of them, I think, becoming confident, and maybe some of them becoming overconfident. And when you're becoming overconfident in your abilities, that might not always translate into the best investments, okay? We can kind of see that. In Silicon Valley, the worst thing is FOMO, the fear of missing out. Sometimes you really become overconfident that this is like one thing. We should invest every single dollar in that space. And I think very often this violates the principles of the venture mindset.
Interesting. So the three things I kind of remember, and I actually came here, before I came here, I thought I would ask you, right? One is, the wisdom of the crowd, is that relevant in the venture mindset? I think in this case, in many ways it matters, right? Because when VC makes the decision, they do, consult the wisdom of the crowd. So that's number one. The second thing about regression to the mean, right? I think your point is if something has more luck in it, then regression to the mean, works perfectly. But something like in the case of the venture, there is some luck and there is some skill set. It's we shouldn't only look at the regression to the means. Just because amazing investor has invested in an amazing company, I shouldn't assume that person will invest in an average company next. That's very good to hear. And then, but the last thing is really good for me to sort of hear and then learn again, right? The better than the average bias. In many ways, the way you articulate it is almost like it's a feature for both the founder as well as the venture,
right.
Because you are investing in something that's honestly the odds is against you, right? You are not doing this thing. The likelihood it's going to win. The likelihood it's going to. So if you don't have the better than average bias, right? Being a little bit more confident, a little bit more confident, it's hard for you to do that, right? So it's almost a feature. That's great. So now let's get into your book, some of the details.
Okay.
So I'm really intrigued by the few things you mentioned to me. One is, I think we may have talked about this, right? The venture mindset is a new mental model where, number one, failure is a must. Maybe you can just double click on what do you mean by failure is a must and give an example.
Yeah. This is in fact one of the first principle of the venture mindset. And the principle is home runs matter, strikeouts don't. So let's start with strikeout. A strikeout means you invested in a startup and it failed. You lost your money, okay? And if you think about traditional mindset, whether it's let's say a bank loan officer or traditional corporate executive, we don't like failures. We're actually very often punished for failures, okay? In the venture world, failures are inevitable. In fact, my research shows that 15 or 16 out of every 20 startups fail. So investors lose money.
Which is no surprise.
No surprise, but it's a surprise, you know, when you talk to like bank executives, like for example, I often
They want to
lead,
hit the rate of their decision to be
so
high.
when I lead often strategic offsite sessions to the leaders of large companies, very often they talk about the concept called the loss ratio. And the goal is to minimize the loss ratio. In the VC world, once you start minimizing the loss ratio, you're very unlikely to be very successful. Okay? Now, why do you encourage failures? When I say encourage, nobody likes failures. But you know that you have to accept failure, and sometimes you have to increase the risk to ensure that you hit a certain failure rate, because then you have a high chance to catch a home run. So there's a trade-off. If you really would like to catch a home run, where most returns are coming from, you need to accept a lot of strikeouts, okay? And by the way, I can give you a lot of examples from the venture capitalists, but let me give you an example maybe from venture-minded organizations. Because what we found out researching this book is that a number of firms, most of them were venture-backed in the past, they continued having this venture mindset. Let me give you an example. So Reed Hastings, the founder and the CEO of Netflix, if you look at Netflix, it's actually organized very similar like a venture capital firm in terms of distribution rate. The distribution of returns on Netflix movies. Most of the Netflix shows are not very successful. So here's the quote from Reed Hastings, which I'm impressed about. To be successful, he says, we should increase the overall cancel rate. Now, by cancel rate, he means the failure rate, really, or the rate of projects that are canceled, because they're unsuccessful. Okay? And I think that is the principle of the venture.
That is the movie they are making, but didn't win the heart of the audience.
They lost money on it, okay? And that's okay. But I think that what I really found out is that in a lot of traditional organizations that are facing disruption in the industry, that should be the right approach. And again, I'm working with a lot of CEOs, chairmen of large companies, and I think one of the biggest challenges they have is that they are very, very conservative in risk-taking. They're afraid of losing money, okay? But the challenge is that, again, without accepting strikeouts, without redesigning your process around the strikeouts, you will never be able to catch a home run.
Interesting. And then in the VC world, 90-some percentage of the gain is actually from a small number of home runs. So if you don't get at least one home run, you don't increase the chance of the home run, then you're wasting your time by doing investment.
Absolutely.
So failure is a must, truly a must, right? Failure is about increasing your odds of getting a home run. Now, of course,
right.
We are not targeting failure, but failure is part of the part of the game. Unlike the corporate executive, right? They wanted to make decisions to lower the chance of the failure, which is a two different mindsets, right? That's very good. Another thing, ideas are rejected in their myriads in search of a single winner. What does that mean?
So here's another principle of the venture mindset, which should be known as say no 100 times. What I mean by this is that, first of all, let me tell you statistics from my data. Per each startup that venture capitalists invest in, they reject more than 100 startups. Just think about this. Okay, that is the origin of saying no 100 times. When I talk to founders, I say, the odds are against you by being funded by top venture capitalists because they're rejecting, a lot of startups.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, why that is really important is because in order, again, to catch an outlier, you need to realize most of them will never be able to become an outlier. And the more you reject early on, for a good reason, the more you will be likely to concentrate on those projects that are more likely to succeed. So as a result of that, what's really happening, and I think it was really, really interesting, what I found out, is that in the venture mindset, it's not just rejection as a must, but you're rejecting differently. That's what's interesting. What do I mean by that? Let's say you have 100 startups, and you will end up making only one investment. First, you reduce the number from 100 to 10. And to do this, what you really do is you are using a very different decision-making process. I call it a red flag approach. What this really means that the red flag approach is you're asking a question, why should we not invest in this deal? Should not. Now, not is very critical. Once you see a red flag, something that makes you uncomfortable, something that makes you likely, you think, oh gosh, that will never become a unicorn, a home run, that's that. You'll move on to another project. That allows VCs to make decisions quickly and efficiently. Now, from 10 to 1, that's a very slow due diligence. Okay? So it's a very, very different decision-making paradigm. And I call this fast lane and slow lane. And again, I think that in many organizations, we have to use the same decision-making process. We have to enlarge our deal funnel so that more opportunities come in. We consider more opportunities. But then we need to use the same red flag approach. Okay? By the way, for this book, what we did is we did a lot of research by watching Shark Tank. It's amazing, right? Like as a part of book research, I'm watching Shark Tank, and in Canada it's called Dragon's Den. So I watched a lot of them, and our assistant watched all of them, I think. Why? Do you know what we found out? Is that those sharks and dragons, they ask a question, and the moment the answer suggests that that company is unlikely to be of interest to them because of the red flag, you just see facially, you see on their face that they lose all interest.
Fast.
That's the principle.
So in the book, you talk about due diligence is put on its head. Is that related to what you just discussed?
It is, but there's something else.
Okay.
There's something else in the due diligence, and this is another principle in the book, and we call it bet on the jockey, not just the horse. Now, first of all, what is the jockey and what is the horse? The jockey is the founding team, so founders, the early team members. The horse is everything else, the market, the value proposition, the business model, the product, and so on, okay? Now, if you think about traditional corporate environment, well, you'll do this 100-page presentations about a project with all the numbers, beautiful pictures, growth projections, okay? For all of this, people are kind of irrelevant. If you decide to go with the project only, then you start thinking about, who is going to implement this? And by the way, again, I think quite often that's the case. When you're in a very kind of marginal, incremental innovation situation, or maybe no innovation at all. But whenever you face uncertainty, who is going to implement, execute on the idea, is as important, if not more important than the idea. I actually think ideas are overrated. It's about the execution of ideas, which really means a lot. And you see this in the venture mindset. You see this that smart VCs are going to, they think that this idea is cool, but if they don't believe that that specific jockey, okay, will implement or execute on the idea, they will not invest. They will rather proceed and will try to find another team that is going to work on the same, in the same space.
So in this case, due diligence is put on its head. What is put on its head referring to?
Put on its head referring to is two things. One we talked about, which is fast lane, slow lane that we discussed. And another one is the weight on factors is different.
Got it.
Right? Which factors are really important for us to make
Not just
a
the
decision.
idea, but also the jockey, the
Right.
things surrounding, and the implementation.
That's right.
Right. And then that's different. In the corporate world, you are implying that people care about the project, the idea,
Right.
more than the jockey. And then also in the corporate world, people usually have a pretty uniform way of selecting from 100 to 10, from 10 to 1. The fast lane first, and then slow lane, later. That framework is not quite there. But in the venture mindset,
That's correct.
you have to have this different mindset. That's why you call it the due diligence is put on its head. That's great. Another thing you mentioned in the book is dissent is encouraged, plugs are pulled. Can you?
Yeah, there are two different principles. So, dissent is encouraged is another principle in the book, which is called agree to disagree. So, if you think about the large corporation, we typically make decisions by consensus. We sit around the table and coalesce and think and discuss,
Everyone's
debate.
a happy family.
And then happy family, we have to ensure that everybody is right, okay? And again, in the venture world, it doesn't work that well.
Like the Reid Hoffman's example.
Like Reid Hoffman's example, okay? And there are many
Invested in
and there are
Airbnb
many-
when a lot of his partners, disagreed.
And here is the point. Let me come back to this example, because in a large corporation, had Reid Hoffman been a senior executive, okay, maybe not the CEO, okay, and would come and say, look, here's the CEO, here's the president of the business unit, here's that, here, let's invest in this startup, okay? Well, he will need to convince everybody. So in fact, the Airbnb investment would never have happened.
Because if consensus is required, there's no deal.
Right. In fact, I'm doing a lot of research and I'm working a lot with corporate venture capitalists. And I think this is one of the challenges of corporate VC, is that they have investment committees that are often filled with the executives of the parent company. And those executives need to be convinced, all of them, or maybe almost all of them, need to be convinced that that's kind of a good idea.
So when you were talking about two different mindsets of being actually, thinking about corporate VC mindset in the last half an hour or so, right? Because venture mindset is one beast, and then the corporate mindset is another beast. Each one has its own constraint, but its own mindset. That's good. But what about corporate VC? They are stuck in between. They are neither VC but not 100% corporate if they want to do their business well, right?
I have to say the life of a corporate VC is tough because they have the mandate to invest in new stuff, new, exciting, shiny stuff.
Yet they have to face the corporate decision
But
making.
very often using the decision-making rules that are established or designed by the large corporation. And I think that is really the reason, as my research shows, that a lot of corporate VC units are not very successful.
From at least the financial gain point of view.
Not just financial, strategically. Both financial,
even strategic.
Absolutely, both financial and strategically. So here's a fact, which is kind of sad in a way. When I talked to more than 150 heads of corporate VC units of major global companies, 60% of them, 6 out of 10, 60% said that their parent executives do not understand the venture norms. Okay? But those parent executives are also on the investment committees. That's tough, I think. And I think the way you have to start with is to ensure that your CEO, your senior executives of the parent company, your board, really everybody else who comes into contact with corporate venture is really is into the venture mindset and understands that if you want to be successful, you have to make decisions different.
So I have quite a few corporate venture friends. For you, I feel, more empathetic about your life. In some ways, your life is between rock and a hard place, right?
Just give the book, the Venture Mindset book, to every single of your executives, and you'll solve the problems.
Okay, that's a good point. And then the last thing, time horizons are extended. So what do you mean by that?
So let's think about a typical corporate project. Yes, there are some very long-term projects. But more often than not, especially public companies that live on a quarterly earnings call basis, I think there's a lot of short-termism. You would like to get the results right away. You look at the financial metrics right away.
Or next 2 quarters, at least.
Or next 2 quarters, right? And this is what I think many corporate executives also call Horizon 1 thinking. You invest in a project, you would like results soon. Well, unfortunately, in the venture world, that very often doesn't happen. One of the most famous venture capital firms out there is Sequoia. And when Sequoia was founded by Don Valentine, a legendary investor here in Silicon Valley in the 70s, the reason he chose the name Sequoia is because Sequoia is a tree that has very specific characteristics. On the one hand, it can live for very, very, very long time, many years. But on the other hand, it takes many years to mature. And I think today it's even more the case than back in the 1970s. It takes longer for many startups, but also for internal corporate projects to mature. And when you demand very quick results, for example, you demand profitability in 2 quarters, again, that really means that you cannot catch that home run that will completely change the model. So completely change the business model of the industry, will completely upend the company that will usher you into 10x. And I think that is what's really missing in the traditional mindset. Now, the venture mindset deals with this. It's not because venture capitalists are, think for a long term. Absolutely not. Okay, they also have short-term views very often, but they design incentives that are longer by giving shares as opposed to fixed salary, by vesting shares as opposed to just to giving shares, by by giving flexibility to extend the investment horizon so they can stay longer with the startup.
And they're rewarding for taking risks.
They're rewarding for taking risks, but I would say they're rewarding for taking long-term risks
Long-term
as well.
risks.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
It's not a short-term gamble very often. It's a long-term risk. And I think that is a big difference. So I think if you ask me what I really hope to achieve with this book, okay, is to make an impact on real-life decision makers. And if real-life decision makers, for example, in large corporations, including leaders of large companies, will increase their horizon of some of their projects. And by the way, it doesn't mean that you invest and forget about it. Absolutely not. Okay, it's absolutely not. It's just that metrics are different.
So very interesting. So you are saying that you articulated a mindset of the venture, right? Successful venture, which is often very different from the mindset of the corporate world or the business world. However, at the same time, you are seeing that that venture mindset, if you apply that appropriately or to a degree, even in the regular business world or in the corporate world, you get a lot of the interesting returns. So you are arguing that it's not like it's just a mindset for VCs only. Are you also saying that this is a mindset that the corporate people, the business people need to think a lot about it?
Absolutely. In fact, I did not write a book for venture investors, even though many venture investors are eagerly reading this, okay?
Interesting.
To learn from the best. And many founders find the book really, really insightful and instructive. But I really rewrote the book for those who make decisions on behalf of many people. Because I think the venture mindset and the principles behind that and the specific actions, mechanisms, behaviors behind that are those that should be taken by everybody in a large organization, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, whether it's in the US or international, it doesn't, or whatever industry.
Wow, so interesting. I'm really glad to have this almost 1 hour conversation, because before I came here, I thought that you are kind of articulating a mindset for VC. So this book is really good for people who wanted to be a VC, who wanted to do investment. I think that's a very good.
I wouldn't say it's good, I would say it's a must read.
Must read for them, right? But then, throughout the conversation, I realized that this is kind of a mindset that people from the business world, from the corporate world, should borrow, should learn, should be aware of at least, right? For instance, if you kind of, as a CEO of a big company or a corporate executive company, you have a corporate venture, you need to set them for success. If you always use the regular corporate way of doing things, you are setting them for failure. So,
Yep.
So I agree with you, right? This book, if you are a corporate VC, you should give your peers, your boss, or your people you are
Right.
working with a copy of the book, so that they can become your partner. They can become, having more awareness, having more empathy in your job, right? Of course, it's more than just a corporate VC, and then also for just if you're a manager, if you're a director, if you aspire to rise, in your career, right? Because a lot of times the outcome, if you deliver good outcomes, you might have a faster lane to rise, along with the corporate ladder. And how do you achieve that? If you incorporate some of the venture mindset, you may actually have a differentiation, right?
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Professor. This is actually, even though you taught, one class about 10 years ago, I really felt I learned so much, and some of the things I really, have been thinking about it again and again. What you just discussed, I'm very sure that I'm going to remember for a long time to come. And I can't wait to get your book. I already ordered, and then I will recommend my friends, my VC friends, my corporate VC friends, and then my corporate friends. And then people also early in the career, right? Because if you kind of have that mindset early in the career, you may have an advantage over people who do not. So
Right.
I'm so happy to have this conversation with you. Any last word that you would wanted to leave to our audience?
I would say that when you think about the venture mindset, there's one last principle that I would like to mention now. There are more that we don't have time to mention here, is getting outside of four walls. What I observe in the traditional corporate environment is that people concentrate too much on their internal day-to-day life. But the most interesting stuff very often is serendipity that is happening outside the four walls of your organization. So try to get out a little bit more often.
Is that somewhat similar to the growth mindset that Microsoft CEO Satya has been talking about?
It is, in my opinion, Microsoft is one of those venture-minded organizations, and Satya Nadella is one of the, I think, most venture-minded leaders out there. Luckily, we have a lot of venture-minded leaders, but Satya Nadella is definitely one of them. Okay, so try to get outside of four walls. Remember that you're unlikely to find very smart VCs in their office all the time. They may be in their office once a week. More often than not, they're outside their office trying to find these great new opportunities.
Thank you, Professor, for coming to Biting to the Future series. And then I hope that this conversation really helping everyone in terms of if you want to do investment, if you want career development, buy the book, The Venture Mindset. Thank you.
Thanks so much.